ship left on the dock for more than 24 hours will be compressed to a cube at the owner's expense. Welcome to Sacred Cow Shipyards.
It occurred to me that there may be some misunderstanding regarding my assessment that there are no good guys in the New Republic. In fact, I would mostly argue that there are no good guys in the Old Republic either, or in the Rebellion, or in the Empire. And this is where it all kind of comes unraveled for all those whiners out there. Just because I say the New Republic is not a good guy does not mean I say that the Empire are the good guys. My contention in the Star Wars universe is the same as it always has been. The only good guys in Star Wars are those poor Sophont slobs who are trying to make a living on their planet no matter what kind of authoritarian autocratic government is currently occupying their planet. The good guys are the normies. The good guys are the moisture farmers, or the krill farmers, or just the random people trying to go about their lives. The Empire is definitely a bad guy. The Old Republic is, well, technically a bad guy, whether you want to admit it or not. The New Republic is also a bad guy, given their prevalence for, concentration camps. But either way, like I said, someone may have misunderstood my contention that the New Republic was a bad guy, and thereby reinterpreted my position as to believing that I think that the Empire would be the good guys, since the New Republic and the Empire were at odds with each other. And if the New Republic are the bad guys, then clearly the Empire must be the good guys, right? Well, no. Emphatically no. I cannot stress enough, no. There is such a thing as a conflict wherein there are no good guys, and Star Wars pretty much sums that up pretty nicely. But to be abundantly, explicitly clear, yes, the Empire are fascist, they are authoritarian, they are dictatorial, and we all know, or at least you should know by now, my position on authoritarian-style governments. I don't care if they fly a Hakenkreuz or a hammer and sickle or a weird circle thing with a diagram inside of it. It doesn't matter to me. I hate them all. I do not have any tolerance for any kind of authoritarian government. Now sure, this is totally my personal preference, and if you have a problem with my personal preference, there's the f***ing airlock and you are welcome to use it. Great Maker knows I've yeeted a number of apologists for any of those organizations out that particular airlock a few times already, so it wouldn't be the first time. Step on up. But I'm sorry, this is not actually a political channel, and maybe I allowed my own personal preferences as to individual autonomy filter into my content, and I suppose I should apologize for that. Although I will admit that it is actually leading into the topic of this week's episode, which is functionally an example of just how absolutely insane the Empire actually was in Star Wars. Now we can have a conversation about the whole, Yuzon Vong and how the Empire's actual militaristic production and development was necessary to keep that particular alien species at bay, but Disney appears to have just totally abandoned that entire concept, and I don't know what to do with it now. Although I guess technically the topic of this week's episode is also abandoned by Disney, and technically was abandoned by Lucas at the time too, so it's a little complicated. Although I will say that the official keeper of the holocron, a sophont by the name of Leland Chi, did specify that this particular item was considered to be canon, at least before Disney bought everything and destroyed everything, and, well, never you mind. Regardless, let me get to the point. I do such a horrible job of that. Anyone who knows anything about Star Wars knows about the TIE Fighter, most notably because of its particular scream as it goes flying past on the screen. And yes, we're not going to talk about how there wouldn't be noise in space. We're not even going to touch on that, even though I just did. But that's beside the point. Anyways, TIE Fighters are expendable. They are expensible. They are just fill in the blank mob fighters. As much as the Rebellion and the New Republic and the Old Republic rely on actual snub fighters, fighters with hyperdrives, fighters with shields specifically, the Empire just relied on numbers. They conscripted people, they shoved them into small tin cans, they shoved them at the enemy, and hopefully they overwhelmed said enemy, or hopefully they didn't, depending on which side of the equation you're on. It doesn't really matter. But TIE Fighters are the perfect example of the Empire's whole, militaristic strategy. Swarm them, overwhelm them. It's classic pre-Soviet and, in fact, Soviet-Russian technology where you just keep throwing bodies at the problem and eventually you'll overwhelm the problem or you'll run out of bodies and then things get kind of complicated. But ideally, you'll just overwhelm the problem with bodies. And in this case, the bodies are in small tin cans that can actually shoot back in limited amounts and are not very good in the end. But we haven't talked about TIE Fighters yet, but we should do that, and we will do that, but this is not that episode. Instead, we are going to talk about a nominal ship that I would wager that most of y'all don't know anything about. In fact, someone on the Twitters reminded me of it, and I had to recalibrate my processors because I did know about it before they reminded me of it. I had just deliberately forgotten it because it's kind of terrifying. Not in a good way, though. Anyways, once upon a time in a midnight dreary, sometime between 1995 and 2000 by your calendar, a company by the name of Kenner released their The Power of the Force 2 toy line. This was apparently a sequel to their toy line from decades before that particular point. And in this toy line was a certain, toy called the Cruise Missile Trooper. It sold for approximately 13 United States dollars at the time, and it never occurred anywhere else other than in this toy. I mean, the toy, of course, existed, but there was no background story beyond the toy. It wasn't included in any kind of comics or any kind of visual anything. It was simply just the toy. As you look back on it now, with Disney having bought everything, it is definitely legends, but even at the time, it was kind of a legend inside of the legend. It was an Inception legend, or something like that. Anyways, what is a cruise missile trooper? Well, it really boils down to what is a cruise missile ship? I mean, the ship itself doesn't have any name aside from the cruise missile trooper, who is the trooper who actually navigates the actual ship. And that's a whole nightmarish conversation that we'll get to in a bit, because it'd be complicated, yo. The ship, or fighter itself, is kind of a, what's that thing on your planet that you carved during the fall festival period? Pumpkin. It's kind of like a pumpkin seed shaped vehicle. And apparently, as the story of the toy goes, when the Imperials want to engage with a rebellion base, the first thing they do when the Star Destroyer drops out of hyperspace is to drop 12 of these cruise missile troopers out of the bomb bay of the Star Destroyer. I didn't actually know the Star Destroyers had bomb bays, but still, they drop 12 of them and off they go to the races. And like I said, when they pop out of that bomb bay, they're actually fairly aerodynamic. At least they're contained. The pilot is actually under like a sealed hatch that closes him in, and the entire vehicle is very compact and very contained. And once it makes re-entry and enters the atmosphere and starts closing in on its target, well then things start getting interesting. You see, once this shaftless arrowhead has dropped through the atmosphere and come close to lining up on its target, it pulls a full Transformer bullshit on you. All of a sudden, the ventral side of the forward section flips open and becomes wings, oddly completely exposing the pilot to surface-to-air fire at the same time, but I guess there's only so much space on this craft. At the same time, or separately, the controls actually operated independently. 2 pods in the stern drop out of the sides, and the engines not only kind of expand themselves to give better control over the vehicle while it is in atmosphere, it also exposes 2 single-shot proton torpedo launchers. Yes, this is in fact a vehicle that probably masses less than the average TIE fighter, and still manages to mount 2 proton torpedo launchers, in addition to actually 2 forward-firing laser cannons, although they look kind of like laser rifles. Maybe they're meant to serve double duty in case the vehicle goes down. I have no idea. Because, of course, these things do go down a lot, simply because they have no armor, they have no shields, and your pilot is kind of like dangling out the bottom of the ship. Although, technically, as the wings open and the engine pod, proton torpedo pods drop down, the hatch that is holding the head of the pilot in opens up, and then he can stick his head out and look around. Without a windscreen, mind you, so this guy is flying at Mach fuck, and the only protection for his little ocular squishy balls is a stormtrooper helmet. And we all know how effective stormtrooper helmets are against even rocks thrown by small bears. You better not find a flock of those Canada geese things on the way in, I guess, huh? But speaking of the pilot and the vehicle going down, which again they do, because of course they get shot at, and well, the survival rate of Imperial pilots is, always low. This is where the things get really, really, really weird. See, in the toy form, the pilot only exists from about his waist up. I think that's mostly because there wasn't actually enough space in the stern of the craft for both his legs and the drive components. I mean, I don't know. It's kind of narrow back there. You would have thought they would have been able to slot in some sort of full-size toy. Or they had a run of broken Stormtrooper toys and were like, what the hell do we do with these? And hey, look, I've got an idea. It's crazy, but it might work. And yeah, the pilot's on this little weird carriage thing from his waist down that pushes him out of the ship, so his little head sticks up, and maybe that mechanism got in the way of the legs. I don't know. Either way, you ain't got no legs, Lieutenant Dan. So what's this in-universe explanation for this bit of insanity that may be nothing more than the physical limitations of a silly little toy? Well, this is from Wikipedia, which is a source on Star Wars at least, and this is a direct quote. Unlike TIE pilots, who are autonomous from their craft, cruise missile troopers were affixed to their cruise missile assault craft from the waist down. Affixed to their craft. Now, I don't really understand what autonomous from their craft might actually mean in the context of TIE fighters. I mean, I'm sure the pilots strap in, they have a hatch that closes the cockpit on them, so they are, in some effect, sealed into the craft. I imagine they can unstrap themselves and get out of the craft if the situation requires it, and maybe that's the difference there. Because otherwise, you've got waist-up only stormtroopers who are permanently installed into combat vehicles. I mean, okay. I mean, aside from those wackadoodle mods from the Book of Boba Fett, you don't really see a whole lot of actual cybernetics in the Star Wars universe. That is to say, the meshing of man and machine. Oh, sure, there was Luke's hand, of course, but that was kind of a one-off that he always kept hidden. There seemed to be some sort of stigma about having cybernetic mods, which would explain why the quote-unquote mods were so flamboyant about it. They embraced the revulsion of those who might not agree with their particular life choices. And then, here's the Empire, possibly permanently bolting people into fighters. 'Cause that makes sense. I mean, unless you have something going on in the Empire that is just churning out stormtroopers without legs in a universe where back-to-tanks exist, mind you, I don't know exactly why you wouldn't just make the ship a little bit bigger to accommodate the human. Of course, I also don't really understand why you couldn't give him a little better ventral armor than a just possibly beefed up chest plate, or, give him a cockpit dome. I mean, simple little creature comforts go a long way, right? So basically, in the end, this bizarre little craft is both representative of the Empire's general gestalt and in terrible violation of them at the same time somehow. On the one hand, the vehicle is clearly expendable. I'm not even sure if it's meant to be recovered after it's entered the atmosphere and delivered its payload. Additionally, it has no appreciable armor, certainly no shields, and barely any protection for the pilot at all. And thus the pilot himself is of course also expendable. This tracks with TIE fighters and their pilots, as well as stormtroopers in general. On the other hand, the Empire is exhibiting a weird propensity towards, I guess recycling might be the term, by reusing potentially mortally wounded stormtroopers in a way that actually provides some utility to the Empire, as horrible as that sounds. I mean, it's straight out of Warhammer 40,000, but they're not just letting them die off in the field, which is mostly what I would have expected them to do, if this is in fact the case again. And on the other hand, the ship, the cruise missile craft, has way more firepower than you'd expect for a vehicle of its size, which again is a strange deviation from the Empire in general. I mean, they do have some pretty heavily armed TIEs, most notably the TIE Defender, and as well as the Skyprey blast boat, but those are kind of exceptions that prove the rule. And yes, of course, I am aware of the TIE Bomber, but you have to remember that thing is nearly 8 meters long, 9 meters wide, and 5 meters tall. It can be converted to be a shuttle and carry 6 people in what used to be its bomb bay. It's a significantly different craft. Because then you got this solo fighter just rolling up on you and dropping 2 proton torpedoes on your base. I mean, you can see a TIE Bomber coming. This thing comes in hard, hot, and fast. Which is probably, honestly, why you have probably never heard of it. Because it's actually an effective craft, aside from the whole suicide aspect of it. I mean, it does massive amounts of damage very quickly, very precisely. And, I mean, that's not in line with the Tarkin doctrine, is it? And I would personally argue that the quote-unquote Tarkin doctrine is an excuse for poor planning on the part of the people in charge of Star Wars. But that's a whole separate conversation for a whole separate episode. And here we are. And that's all from Sacred Cow Shipyards. Please be advised that any ship left on the docks for more than 24 hours will be compressed to a cube at the owner's expense. Have a nice day.